As this suspension is over, we will now resume on order number 3, and the member for St. Michael West will continue his speech.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I was trying to make the point. I believe we need to revisit the issue of foreign land ownership in Barbados. I really think that we need to seriously study how that impacts upon the development prospects as they relate to the working class, the low-income groups in Barbados, whether or not it is something which inhibits the development of their interests or development relative to their interests, and whether or not substantially it contributes such to the development, the national development goals, that it is something that we have to embrace out of necessity. But certainly I believe that if persons are going to seek from overseas, people who have no citizenship connection with Barbados, to own lands in Barbados, significantly so, that should be for the purpose of development and not just a home away from home, which to that extent does not necessarily fully contribute to our national purse. So we need to look at foreign land ownership. Should we have leasehold only arrangements? Do we allow for freehold to continue? I believe that's a very serious matter. We have to concern ourselves with the future's legacy. Development cannot be skewed. Our development should not be exclusive and therefore generating benefits only for a select group or a select class. But our development achievements should, as far as is practicable, allow for shared prosperity and the achievement of shared aspirations across the social landscape. Seriously, we need to address ownership structures in Barbados, and I think that that is a significant consideration in the wider context of ownership structures in Barbados. If there is one mandate that any government in 2018 ought to have and to seriously internalize and undertake, it's to address the matter of ownership and ownership structures in Barbados. I think very passingly we talk about owning a piece of the rock. It is that and more. And we all have a stake in this country and should all be allowed to have the opportunities relative to actualizing what that stake in this country, Mr. Deputy Speaker, represents. The last thing I'd want to talk about, briefly so, is the matter of legislation relative to landlord-tenant relationships in Barbados. If you represent, especially in urban constituents in Barbados, you hear repeatedly horror stories on both sides of the issue, from landlords and from tenants. Landlords who exploit tenants, tenants who take advantage of rental situations and are very obstinate, recalcitrant in their relationship obligations and arrangements with the landlord, and that has to be seriously addressed. There are too many of our female population who are forced to surrender their dignity in that type of a context where you look to have a roof over your head, you can only afford to rent, and an unscrupulous landlord, not necessarily interested in pecuniary or financial gain or advancement, but in other advancement, more so advances, and then our female population is exposed to that. Mr. Deputy Speaker, those few things concern me this morning, and I just wanted to put that as part of our debate. Thank you.
Thank you. Before the member for St. Michael Sophie, we want the minister now to introduce order number 3. Yeah.
Deputy Speaker, I would like to thank the member for St. Lucie for introducing this resolution. I think that when we began the other resolution with respect to Charnox, most of the members of Parliament were under the impression that we were doing the resolution for Charnox. But the honourable member for St. Lucie, following the invitation from the clerk, did introduce the resolution the relevant resolution for Cloughs. I therefore would like to move that this resolution do not pass, but before doing so, Mr. Speaker, I would just like to state that just for the benefit of the procedure, the resolution that we are dealing with today is Cloughs, so that those persons who have spoken already with respect to, for today, would have spoken on Cloughs, but all members would be entitled to speak again, not necessarily speak again, to speak on the resolution. The file for Cloughs has just arrived, but we'll be allowed to, those who have not spoken today, only 2 persons have spoken on this resolution. So those persons who have spoken today on Cloughs will not be able to speak on Cloughs again, but we will actually bring back the resolution with respect to Charnox when we have completed this resolution, even though I would say that most of the comments which we have, I would have mentioned in my wrapping up, would really apply to both resolutions. But before I sit, I just want to make a few comments with respect to some of the matters which have been raised by the leader of the opposition, and I must thank the leader of the opposition for alerting us to the discrepancy of which I spoke earlier. But he did mention a few points in the substance of his resolution, which of his presentation, which are not quite accurate. And if I may deal with the one he mentioned last first, I think that he gave his comments, his presentation gave the impression to this House and would give the impression to wider Barbados that there has been a certain upsurge with respect to the values of land in Barbados as a result of the foreign component. I think this is a myth. I think that if you may recall, a number of years ago, as far back as the administration of the late Prime Minister for St. John, Honourable Barrow, this was a myth, and at the time there was talk of an Alien Landholdings Act in order to stem the flow of persons from overseas coming in and buying land. And I think that if you may recall, as a result of that myth, more or less, because I do not think that the Prime Minister of the day at the time really believed that, if he was in this time, now you call it fake news. But he used the opportunity to introduce the property transfer tax as a money generating tool in order to satisfy those persons who believed that the foreigners were actually contributing to the increase in land values, and also that they were occupying lands which were owned by Barbadians. I mean, and this is not true, because when you look at the West Coast, you would notice that almost all of the lands that are being bought by foreigners in Barbados, they're lands on the West Coast. And no, there has been, I would say, I can't even say little, absolutely no foreign intervention of lands in inland Barbados. You know, but people continue to make this assertion that foreigners are coming in and buying up lands. And what has been happening is that the foreigners are buying up lands that are owned by foreigners. You have the occasional instance where a person might have land on the beach. I certainly would not be able to afford, if I had land on the beach, I would not be able to maintain those lands. And a few Barbadians who have land on the beach, recognizing that their land, the values of their lands have gone up, they have decided to sell the land to foreigners. In addition to that, I don't think that we have been very kind to our own people, in that those persons who have lands on the beach, because of the land valuation, the changes in valuation year after year, you have situations where a person might have land, and as a result of the development taking place around him, the values have gone up. And that person, even though the land was his birthright, all of a sudden he's being called to pay land tax way in excess of what it was when he first inherited the land. I think that the legislation for some time should have been amended to ensure that when a person is living on lands or owns land in these circumstances, that no matter what is happening around him, under no circumstances should the land values be increased above a certain percentage. And I would say that a percentage of 10% should be the norm. And I'm a little surprised that legislation has not been put in place. But maybe it has not been put in place because it has not been necessary, because all of the local owners have been selling their properties. So you haven't had foreigners coming to Barbados and buying lands in St. George, in St. Thomas, St. Philip, apart from the parts outside of the parts near the beach. So it is wrong. It is a myth. I wouldn't say that it is not fake news, as people what people say these days without calling something a lie. But it is not so. Definitely not so. But I must say that argument is somewhat misleading. Because when you look at the lands even inland, you have, especially in this market, you have lands that have been advertised for sale, sometimes for as long as 6 months. 6 months and no sale. Even in a government corporation like the National Housing Corporation, we had some lands available for sale for a very, very long time. I would say almost a year, at $25 a square foot. And we had to bring down the price in order to accommodate potential buyers. And not a single person who made an application to purchase those lots, not one was from overseas. You look at Coverley as a classic example. I think that the persons who, we would have to speak to Coverley with respect to what took place at Coverley in another debate if the opportunity arises. But Coverley, it was anticipated that the persons who came up with the idea of Coverley, it was a good idea. Maybe it was not implemented in the way that it should have been. And there are still a lot of question marks surrounding Coverley. It is good that at least it was conceptualized at the time, because it has now redounded to the benefit of what is taking place with respect to the medical school which is coming to Barbados. But it was anticipated in Coverley that a number of foreigners, if you rank Barbadians who are living overseas coming to Barbados, or if you rank persons who wanted to use Barbados as a retirement home, and as a good example, Coverley was the place. But yet, despite the fact that I think it was 1,123 houses that were supposed to be built, the developer had to stop because of the fact that everything went dormant. Everything went dormant. So that Coverley would have been, you could almost say it was a disaster, but it could have been disastrous had not for the intervention of the Ross Medical School. I would like the leader of the opposition to show me anywhere in Barbados, any one place in Barbados, where you have had a situation where foreigners have caused the price of land to increase. Show me one at the expense of locals. It has not happened. And it is something that people continually keep saying. And when you hear somebody like the leader of the opposition making a comment like that, you hear people on the call-in program make that comment. But it is simply not true. What you have got with respect to those people, those foreign owners, what you've got in Barbados is situations where people come to Barbados looking for an investment, and for some reason or other they probably might feel, well, this is not the place, or they might realize that they have made the investment and they decide to sell. And you have got exorbitant prices on the West Coast. in those areas. I mean, I could tell you because, I mean, I have worked for people, foreign persons with respect to this practice which takes place. So you have situations where a person would buy a parcel of land from a local for, if I may use hypothetical figures, for $100,000, and then he puts up a structure, and he probably spends $15 million on that particular structure. And lo and behold, as soon as he is finished, some other foreign national come and he wants to buy that, and that building is knocked down, and something else goes up. And another foreign national purchases the property. Nothing to do with locals. It is all about ego. All about ego. Because people, money, you're dealing with an environment where money does not matter. The quantum does not matter. So I just thought, from my own experience, and I think to state the factual position, foreign nationals, I mean foreigners, in no way has affected the price of land. Another part he did mention is with respect to the fact that the National Housing Corporation should not see itself as a revenue, I think that's the word he used, as a revenue generating entity. Sounds good. Sounds good, because really the National Housing Corporation should not see itself in that light. I agree with that. But that is not so with the National Housing Corporation. And I must say that the National Housing Corporation has had to bear, a lot of, for want of a better word, insults by a lot of individuals who they do not understand the real role of the National Housing Corporation. I recall a few years ago when the National Housing Corporation, when the government had decided that they would put up a building, a unit, because of the amount of rents that were being paid by, the rents that were being paid by government to private institutions. Government, I recall, decided that they would put up a building. And it had nothing to do with the National Housing Corporation. And government embarked on this bold initiative of putting up a government building where they would house a number of government entities. Nothing to do with the National Housing Corporation. But then, having made that decision at the level of cabinet, some other entity had then to take over the responsibility of executing it. And all the National Housing Corporation was called upon to do is to more or less manage the project. And then you had claims by the opposition as a result of this that the National Housing Corporation is in the commercial business. We even had to amend the legislation because that was not the role of the National Housing Corporation, yes. But the National Housing Corporation did not seek to construct government buildings. It was called upon, it was a mandate, it was given to them. Look, government has made a decision that we are going to put up a building. And the only entity, it was only the Ministry of Public Works or the Ministry of Housing. And then if you decide of the Ministry of Housing, the only thing you would happen, you had the National Housing Corporation. And the National Housing Corporation was unfairly castigated as getting involved in all sorts of things. I mean, and you're dealing with a ministry, I must say, excellent officers. The technical officers, the artisans, I mean, and they work day in and day out. I mean, in this scheme of layoffs, when you look at it and you look at the complement of officers within the ministry, even down to the very artisans, the laborers, that institution was savage. A few months ago, in 2014, a few years ago, when the Democratic Labour Party decided that they would send home people. And people went home simply because they were members of the Barbados Labour Party. But they were savage, that organization was savage. And even in this present dispensation, it is extremely difficult when you look at the contribution which is being made by the officers from the general manager right back down. if it is one institution that I could actually say that is deserving of some sort of credit for the work that is being done, it is the National Housing Corporation. I mean, and when you look, the honourable member spoke to the sites and services, which is true. We should be engaged in finding spots for people, because the days of low-income housing is no more unless it is heavily subsidized by government, or you have international, not spend to say some international agencies, the American Development Bank, the World Bank, the Caribbean Development Bank, those institutions, and now you have the National Insurance Scheme, facilitating that type of development. But the National Housing Corporation is being called upon not only to manage its affairs and to ensure that the properties, that they do justice to the resources it has available. But it is also called upon to provide low-income housing, and when they do so, it is at a cost to the National Housing Corporation. And you could take one or two developments as a classic example. Lancaster. You had Lancaster, although I must say that I don't understand how the values of those houses got to the point where they were. And I mean, I must blame the political directorate for the construction of the type of houses and the amount of money which was spent there and above what it should have been. But you have a situation at, if I may look at the figures, at Lancaster, where the expenditure in seeing that development come to fruition was something like $10.6 million, and the actual revenue was just about 6.4, which means that those houses were subsidized to the tune of about $4 million. $4 million. The same thing happened at Constant. It is true that in both cases there were other factors intervening. With respect to government housing, there needs to be a closer relationship between the Ministry of Housing, the drainage, town planning, when it comes to this development. Because you have situations where one egotistical officer could cost government about $2 million because sometimes they sit in their office and they demand certain things that are totally unrelated to the development at hand. And Lancaster is a classic example. At Lancaster, you had a situation where I think it was, I don't remember the numbers very well, it could be about 33 houses being constructed, houses completed. And then when the houses were about to be converted, even though town planning had approved the subdivision, you had the town planning department then refusing to issue a certificate of compliance because the drainage department insisted on a drainage system in an area that was never ever affected by drainage, even though they had the example of a previous development being built to the north of that same development. As a result of this, government ended up spending something like $3 million to provide drainage for 9 houses. The prices had already been determined. Now, that is not a cost that could have been passed on. A National Housing Corporation, was called upon to do that on their own. Similarly at Constant, price agreed on everything, and then the drainage came up. You have to put in a sewer system. $1.9 million, totally unprovided for. So it is a little unfair when you look at the work of National Housing, you look at the work of government, and you indicate that the National Housing Corporation operates as a revenue-generating entity. Not so. I would say that with respect to his talk about the house spots, I mean, for someone who was born in Joes River, I cannot believe that he would make the type of comments, especially when he's looking at the background of persons like myself and the honourable member for St. Joseph, because I'm sure that he had the honour of going to school in socks and shoes in those days, and he left Joes River because his parents felt that St. Andrew, the country, St. Joseph was not the place for bright young, somebody wanting a bright future. His parents had some other aspiration for him, but if they came back, they probably would be disappointed at where he is at this particular point in time. But we feel this is where the government must govern. Sometimes I like to listen to the honourable member for St. Michael East with respect to the plight of poor persons, even though he don't like to use the word squatting. But there are persons who would never ever, especially the way how we are now and the economic situation as it is. There are persons in Barbados who are in their infancy, and their parents could only look at them and hope. They would never ever be able to own what we call a piece of the rock in this country unless something intervene at the level of government. It cannot. And I think that we should create those opportunities for those type of individuals. A person don't squat because they are criminal. I mean, you squat out of necessity. And most of those people who squat are people who honestly would like to get on in life and would like to ensure that their children don't suffer the same fate as they do. And this is where government should intervene a lot in the whole housing program. You have, and you look at the town planning legislation. You look at the legislation with respect to Zone 1 and Zone 2. It's good that we are looking at that at this particular point in time. But I still am not convinced about this Zone 1 and Zone 2 and the problems with you're not being able to build in certain areas. I don't see anything that could tell me that there's something wrong with building in Zone 1 and there's something right with building in some of the other areas. I mean, the proposals are presently before government, and I really would not want, and as part of government, I won't want to say anything too negative in that direction. But it is wrong for you to tell me 100 years ago, my father decided to buy some land in Old Town. And my father's brother decided to buy some land in Morgan Lewis and Andrew. And you have now, 100 years after, my father who lives in Morgan Lewis, who was better off than my father, than his brother or his relative who bought land in Old Town. The guy in Old Town is now a multi-millionaire. And the guy in Morgan Lewis, he can't do anything at all with his land. Now that is unfair. And if government is to go that route, I think it should do something to ensure that adequate compensation is given to the fellow in Morgan Lewis. And we have not gone that far. In addition to that, the lands which have been zoned for agricultural area, I think you call it Mr. Deputy Speaker, you can help me because you were Minister of Housing, the ribbon type development. Yeah. Where in many areas, this is one of the areas where we could actually alleviate the plight of a lot of poor people and give them the opportunity to own lands. We could do a survey of lands in the agricultural belt. And all of those lands you could create, I believe you could create as much as 2,000 lots on the roadside without any development, because a lot of money goes into the infrastructure when you're dealing with the development. And if you do the ribbon development onto the front of the road, yes, I believe, and you do proper survey throughout the line from breadth, government acquire all of those lands. You could have a ribbon development without actually any infrastructural cost, because you have the water is there already, the light is there already, everything is there. And I think that especially in these economic times, we have got to look at these type of things in order to assist those persons who are not able to buy their house, able to live the type of life that we are living. Because if we don't, those people will be breaking into our houses. They wouldn't have anything to do. They wouldn't have any, they're not getting any jobs. They're going to universities, they're coming out and they're not getting any jobs. A lot of them are not going to universities because they recognize that if I go to university, it doesn't make sense, because when they come, I still ain't getting a job. And they're involved in all sorts of activities. We've got to give them some hope. And I think that these are the things that we as a government should be looking at. So, I mean, I must say that is one thing, even though he didn't go into detail, that I agree with the leader of the opposition. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm obliged to you, and I formally move that this resolution do now pass.
Question is that this resolution do not pass. All those members in favor say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Member for St. Michael South East.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I believe I have to just first of all clarify for the listening public, because I am one who believes that we are no longer only in this chamber speaking to the public gallery or speaking to the persons listening on radio, but we believe we have a responsibility to the wider public who is tuned in listening to have an appreciation of what is transpiring. We have 2 housing resolutions on the order paper. I am grateful to the Honourable Minister, Member for St. Andrew, for ensuring that the government's business in relation to housing is placed paramount in relation to this government's mandate. We would have started debate in relation to the other resolution in relation to Chancery Lane last week, and debate on that resolution would have been postponed. However, in relation to today's agenda, the intention was to continue debate on the Chancery Lane resolution, because other members would have wanted the opportunity to continue debate on this important matter. However, there would have been some typographical errors which would have appeared in both the minutes as well as the order paper. As a consequence, being so guided by the documents which appeared in front of the Honourable Clerk, he would have made reference to the resolution in relation to the Clough's acquisition vesting. As a consequence, the Honourable Minister would have recognized the error, having had it raised by the Leader of Opposition, because he would have spoken to the latter resolution, and we attempted to basically have the Honourable Minister speak to that particular resolution so that there was no imbalance in relation to explaining where we were in relation to order number 3 and order number 4. I feel that I have to start there because we have come to office as a government not to engage in a situation where we encourage things when we see them going wrong, but we have a responsibility to put things right when we see them going wrong. And so we will continue debate in relation to both resolutions in due course, but I believe it is important to just clarify so that people do not believe that the government of Barbados is in any way unprepared for what the task is that it has been given a mandate to do, but to ensure that when things go wrong, I'm not pointing fingers at anyone, but the point is that we have to call a spade, and we have to say that we have to correct certain things and set the record straight. That is the mandate that has been given to the Barbados Labour Party and to this administration. And so I want to again commend the Honourable Minister, because in the last administration I sat on the other side and I had to bear the introduction of resolutions by a Minister of Housing who failed to collide with the information at hand in his ministry. There were many times that resolutions were brought to this chamber where it was more than, very difficult for us to understand what was the status of housing and housing policy in this country. As we hear these resolutions being spoken about both last week and today, I think it is important that we chart the way forward by establishing a clear housing policy in this country. To the best of my mind, there has not been one for perhaps over a decade, and I believe that the Honourable Minister is ensuring that we work and move in that direction to ensure that we have a clear policy. It is okay for us to sit in this chamber and recite what the Barbados Labour Party did and to say what the Democratic Labour Party did, but no good will come of any of that if we do not fully appreciate the purpose and the role of the National Housing Corporation and what its mandate is supposed to be for people who are in need of accommodation. That is the first thing that must happen. And across ministries, that is what we must seek to do in terms of being able to set definitive policy so that people are clear in respective ministries what it is that they are supposed to be doing. Because I have come to office and I have recognized that people have been doing things, but they are not guided in many cases by any clear understanding of what they are there coming to work to do every single day. And housing is no different, education is no different. None of the ministries. In a lot of cases, we have situations where there has to be a step back and a clear understanding so that people come to work knowing what the vision is, knowing where we want to take the country. But we cannot have situations where the Honourable Leader of the Opposition has to ask the question, what is the mandate of the National Housing Corporation? We must know what the mandate of the National Housing Corporation is, because we all know what the issues are in relation to all of our constituents across Barbados trying to get access to housing. We tell each of them, go and sign up at the National Housing Corporation. I keep telling people, keep going back and register again, because I'm mindful that with the number of applications that there are before the National Housing Corporation, that we don't have the number of housing accommodation to be able to satisfy the demand that is existing across this country. And we have had an administration before this one that would want to take the opportunity for photo ops, to have people turning keys in doors. But then when you look at the solutions to the problems and the challenges that have been facing the National Housing Corporation, they have time and time again failed to address the issue in terms of a clear policy in relation to this issue. And so I know that my friend from St. Andrew is going to make sure it happens, because I know he has people down in White Hill in St. Andrew that need accommodation. And those people who find themselves in a situation where, the circumstances that they've found themselves are not through any fault of their own, we owe it to them as a government to make sure that we make provision for them in the future. Just as I know that we have to make accommodation for the people who lose their houses in fires. I've heard the policy talked about, but I've not seen it clearly administered by officers over the year, where people lose their homes in a fire and then we're in a mad scramble trying to call welfare and housing to try to find accommodation for them. There must be a clear policy in terms of responding when people lose their homes in a fire and children are displaced, that we know that there's a stock available of housing accommodation across this country, that you know that you can pick up the phone and you can call and you say, Minister, this is what is happening. Officer, this is what is happening. I heard that when I think it was Valerie, that there was supposed to be accommodation for those kinds of situations. But still we can all tell the stories of persons who have not been accommodated quickly enough in relation to losing their homes in a natural disaster. We also have to have clear policy in relation to people who have disabilities, because we have to be mindful that a number of even the units that have been built over the years, a lot of our elderly now cannot go upstairs because they can't go up the stairs because they have all kinds of chronic non-communicable diseases, and they're downstairs having to do everything in their living room. We have to have a clear policy that deals with them as well. Overseas, and particularly in the UK, you have a situation where, because of the similarities to here, I will draw this analogy. You have a situation where the United Kingdom government would have provided for people at the low income level. But what they do is they constantly assess the situation in the country by making sure that there's statistics which are guiding them, and statistics being utilized by them, to look at how populations have been increased, to look at how densely populated a particular area is, to be able to look at whether a unit that was housing 6 children and 2 adults may now need to be expanded into the unit next door to be able to ensure that there are not 3 and 4 people sleeping on one mattress in the front house and another mattress to the side, which in what was supposed to be the living room. These are the things that only with research and statistics can inform proper housing policy. And we have a number of people who call themselves planning officers and research assistants. We have to come to a point where we start to utilize the skills that we are sending them to the University of the West Indies to get an education to do. It is no more about a title, but we have to get our planning departments and our research assistants and our statistical analysts, get them to a stage where they start to inform the policy in the respective ministries to the benefit of the people of this country. Because people must now come to work with a purpose. We have found ourselves in this situation not because we want to lay off people, but when I look back in relation to the National Housing Corporation, I find report budget after budget where the former Minister of Finance would come into this chamber and talk about rationalization of state-owned entities and statutory corporations. All the way back in 2013, we were hearing that in this chamber. And not a single thing was done in relation to ensuring that steps were taken to cut the costs of these corporations. Instead, what did they do? Add people, buffer people into the system. And it's not that we got a problem with people getting work, because I hear people talking this nonsense that the Labour Party come in and all of a sudden we are laying off people. But if you pad an institution, if you pad a ministry, you pad a corporation, and people are going to work and drawing a salary, there's going to come a day when the government of Barbados is going to be unable to pay its way when we have people who are not productive. So what we have come to office to do is to make sure that people come to work and get an honest day's pay for an honest day's work. We have come to office to put wrong things right. And there are a lot of things in the National Housing Corporation that have to be put right. Because you have a situation, I represent the largest housing area in this country. And I want to tell the country that we have a situation where, particularly in the housing areas, they are densely populated, and it is creating a number of socio and economic problems for our people. We have to start to ease the pressure. So, Mr. Minister of Housing, Member for St. Andrew, I am making an appeal on the floor of this Parliament, and it's not just for St. Michael South East, but I'm making an appeal in the ministry that as we, as a government, look towards rationalizing the system in housing, that we also pay attention in terms of our planning to to the specific areas where we see that you have particular problems in relation to whether it is crime, whether it is poverty, whatever it is, that we look at those situations and we seek to address it. Because the days of only putting housing and projects in an area where a minister represents or where his friends represent, those days must come to an end. The days where you have to know the minister of housing or do other things in relation to a minister to be able to get what you need done in this country, particularly our women who have had to sacrifice themselves to make sure that they get a piece of accommodation, those days have to come to an end. I see, I like to tell people I've had my Jesus moment. So I am not afraid to speak and to call it as I see it. But if you have all these applications before the National Housing Corporation for accommodation, it tells me that there must be a system of evaluation. It cannot be that somebody can tell us that they've had an application in housing for over 20 years, with the children long gone and grown up and get into all kinds of problems. Because you must understand, and the member for St. Thomas as the minister responsible for this area would understand, and so would the minister of youth as well, would understand the situations that arise when you have overcrowding, when you have even you have families and you have extended families in a house and you have little children, and little children get interfered with by big adults and people who in some cases are not even related to them. We have a responsibility to plan for housing. We have a responsibility to the future of this country to plan, and not to plan in an ad hoc manner, but to make sure that we do assessments in terms of where the problems are and to be able to find solutions to the problem. So I have spoken on several occasions about issues in relation to the transfer of the units. I know the minister spoke about it last week. We've had these issues from time immemorial. But you know what? We have to reach a point where we call a spade a spade. The last administration brought legislation on the eve of an election, telling the people across this country who were in these terrace units that they would, if they voted for them, that they were going to be entitled to their units because they would have been paying for the rents over a period of 20 years. And the Barbados Labour Party lost the election. But what did they do? They then came on the eve of the next election, having not conveyed several of the units to the people of this country, and in particular the people in St. Michael's Southeast, who are still waiting for their conveyances. And they came with another piece of legislation, giving again the impression that they were now trying to accelerate the process, that they had a few teething issues, and now they were going to make sure that you had the piece of paper in your hand and that you were able to go to the bank to make sure that you could extend the property that you have. And instead, what was the fate of people across this country who never got the conveyances? You can't get to take it to get the mortgage on the property to do any repairs. You can't put up the title deeds because you don't have them. If your child or your family member get in trouble and you need to be able to put up an asset as a surety. You couldn't do anything, medical expenses. You can't even to this day be able to do that. And it is not fair to the people who have been paying. I ain't talking about the ones who haven't paid. I'm talking about the people who legitimately have paid over the years, who have contributed to the National Housing Corporation, who by rights are owners of their property, but they do not have a piece of paper to be able to take anywhere, to be able to give them a benefit to do for themselves. And I know there are people who want to be able to use their income to be able to improve their accommodation. It isn't everybody who wants a handout. And I say to the member for St. Andrew, we have to put this on the front burner because there are too many people who need that title deed in order to be able to do certain things to make things right. I had a young lady yesterday, and I'm going to bring it down to the reality of what is happening, who lives in a unit, and she is now battling a diagnosis that her cancer has spread, not just from the breast, but it is now in the lungs and is now going to the liver. But here's the challenge. Her mother is waiting on the same title deed. And with that title deed, she may have been in a position to get a little extra funds to help with the medical expenses because the cost of cancer is high. But she doesn't have it. And I say, if it is that we have to put resources or accelerate the department, the legal department in the Ministry of Housing, to make sure that we put wrong things right, we need to do it. Because at the end of the day, I understand that the last administration lost opportunities in relation to this area, because we were supposed to access international funding to ensure that the electrical was dealt with. We were supposed to access funding to make sure that we corrected the issues in terms of sewage, because unlike a condominium declaration document where you're going to have common areas, the Crown still has to maintain certain common areas in principle, because we know that not everybody on a particular housing estate is in the same financial situation. This is not rocket science. We have enough lawyers and bright lawyers in this country to get this issue corrected. And if we have to accelerate within the ministry a situation where we go after the funding that is necessary to correct the issues down in Haynesville and in the Pine and in Silver Hill, then we have to move aggressively now to do it. But what I fear is that the number of people who have contacted me over the past few weeks as we have gone after those who have been delinquent, is that we still have to bear in mind that there are people who, while there are some that are delinquent and who we have to get to the bottom of them, who have taken the money instead of paying the minimum rent and gone and put the money elsewhere, that we have to get to a situation where we understand what has happened over the last decade. Because we have had housing officers who should have been out there making sure that rents were collected and reporting back to the ministry the issues that were going on in relation to the asbestos roofs and the fact that people were operating with pit toilets, or that there needed to be repairs to the electrical, and they did not report to the National Housing Corporation Board. And Minister, I say to you, we have to get an honest day's work out of our people. So for those who know that they are guilty, I expect that this minister is going to make sure that those things are corrected. Because you cannot tell me a whole decade has passed and people owe thousands upon thousands of dollars. You know, we have to let people know what they need to do if they find themselves on hard times. We understand people are going to be laid off. Well, we need a public relations program which tells people, contact X officer, set the record straight, and let people know what your financial situation is. But what we cannot do is, after years of them not paying for whatever reason, we go after persons knowing that things are even a little harder without a proper understanding of how the circumstances have arisen that have gotten individuals into a predicament where the arrears are 10,000 or 15,000. I remember having a situation under the last administration where, you know, we found ourselves in a position where people from my constituency would call me and ask me to write a letter to poverty alleviation to pay the arrears of rent to national housing. What madness! Because it is still government that has to pay. So if it is that we recognize that the payments need to be made or an ease need to be given, it is a nonsense to say that another government department is supposed to pay the arrears that are already owed to the government of Barbados. So is it that we need to have a period where, you know, amnesty for some people? Because as the minister has said repeatedly, we are found ourselves under this 20-year program in a situation where rental income is no longer being collected by the government of Barbados. Let us accept it. Is it that we've come to that point where we have to recognize where we are? That it may be difficult to get the monies out of these people? But whatever it is, we have to do the work and get the research done and the statistics to understand where we are going. Because I don't take comfort hearing people call me and say that they're being evicted or they get the blue paper or they got to go to court. I've never enjoyed hearing it. Whether under the last administration or this administration, we have a job to do, but we have to make sure that we put it in a context, because we can't be sending home people and at the same time we don't have our officers investigating the circumstances fully. Repeat offenders must be dealt with, but there are genuine circumstances that need to be drawn to the attention of the officers before it reaches the court in order to make sure that wrong things are put right. And I speak with this passion because, as I said, I had to listen to a minister of housing before that never collided with the issues of the people in this country. And therefore, I know that this administration cares. I know from my leader back down cares. And I know that the minister who was a former minister of housing has the ability to call on other ministers of housing within this administration to be able to get it right in relation to this issue. But we must have a policy. And you see the rationalization that must come because the National Housing Corporation is in significant debt. So rationalization must come. This is not to be fearful of it. This is to call it as you see it and to say we have to trim and we're going to have to cut and we're going to have to get greater efficiencies in the system because it is either that or we are going to face even worse financial consequences in this country. I like to put it in a context. We did not come to office to lay off anybody. We don't take any pride in laying off anybody. None of us do. We watch people get fat on this side, saying one thing with one side of their mouth and doing something else. And the former Minister of Finance spoke about a housing project down in Exmouth. Minister of Housing, I hope that we can get to the bottom of that. Because back 3 years ago, people down in the farm and deacons were promised that there would have been a project that was going to generate significant financial revenue for this country, create jobs. But we heard that time and time again. You see, in all of what we are doing in the transformation policy, we have to remind people, not that we're dwelling on anything, but we have to remind them how we got here in relation to every single sector, every single ministry. Because when I look back at the special audit on the National Housing Corporation at the Grotto and Valerie, well, I remember when this was laid in this chamber, and members on this side at the time, 2016, and I believe it's already a document to the House.
Yes.
When this was laid in this chamber, members on this side didn't even want to collide with anything that was written in this document because it spoke about a story of people ignoring the board decisions, things not going out for tender, about the fact that two housing projects were supposed to be for low-income people, but turned into something which only fattened the pockets of those who were granting the permission for people to be able to construct housing in this country. And we are now, I am sure when the minister does his records, he will see that we will be operating at a loss as a result of where we are right now in relation to those two projects. Not that we don't want to house the people who are there, but the reality is for what those projects cost, we cannot charge people who are low-income earners the cost and the value of what those units were built for. So government has once again found itself in a hole. And I would want that, we step back and we talk about these things because we did not get here by chance. We got here because we had a former administration that did a lot of nonsense and wasn't accountable. And when I hear the minister in Finance and Economic Affairs speak to this whole issue of the Auditor General's department having an increase in staff, I am all for that. Because I don't like the fact that these reports have now become something that you just refer to, but nobody has not gotten locked up for the details in the recommendations. I am not satisfied, because if we are going to employ more people to dig into what happened over the last decade, then we have to make sure that we also put all the mechanisms in place where people have dipped into the kitty and taken up money that was not theirs. We have to make sure that somebody is held accountable for it.
Valid point.
The time will come in the National Housing Corporation where the minister is going to have to face what we've faced in the other ministries as well. Because the rationalization that must take place there is going to result in job losses and across other departments. But remember, it didn't start with the Labour Party. The conversation about it started before us, but we have to play the hand that we've been dealt. And therefore, we will do it with the people's interests always at the forefront. But what I will not be party to is a situation where fingers get pointed at us as though we have come to slash and to cut and to burn and to dislocate families. Because even in my ministry, I see the same thing. If you have not spent money in relation to the National Housing Corporation and its units and making sure that money is generated, you haven't spent money in relation to the schools. We have schools in this country that the last administration completely ignored in terms of maintenance. It is not by chance that we have environmental issues across our schools. It is not by chance. It is because you had an administration that felt that they could spend the money in a different way. And the reports don't lie, so it tells you where the money went. I don't have to say where the money went. But what we cannot do is be sending home people and not calling out people as well for the things that have gone wrong. Because I know in my ministry, I am making sure that when I'm talking about layoffs, and I'm sensitive to the issue, I'm also talking about teachers who I get complaints for. And remember, there's good teachers and there's bad teachers as there are in everything, good politicians and bad politicians. So I ain't on teachers, I'm talking about the facts. You have a situation where teachers, we get complaints, teachers haven't come to work on time. Or they don't come at all. You have situations where people have been on suspension for several years and the matters have not been dealt with either by the court or by the Solicitor General's chambers. I know that will get corrected under this administration. But people are going home. It isn't fair. And therefore, across ministries, and in particular in the National Housing Corporation, we're going to have to call a spade, and we're going to have to call out the people who have been drawing money repeatedly when others are being sent through the door. Because these things have to come to a closure. You cannot have a situation where you are sending home people and there are people who know that somebody carry away money in the ministry and they appear in an Auditor General report, but they have not been brought before the law. I mean, it is a nonsense. And we have to be real. You cannot have a situation where people are absent from work, are continuing to draw a salary, have figured out how to deal with certified and uncertified sick leave in a way that when you look at it, you would have to be an idiot not to realize that whether there is a good reason or a bad reason, there is a reason that needs to be investigated and for which a decision needs to be made one way or the other, whether that person can continue in a productive way in the job that they have been given to do. So whether it is that we need to get them medically boarded, whether it is that we need to put them to do a lesser job to be able to function in the ministry, whether we need to be able to shift them to do something else so that they are still productive, decisions have to be made. But what we cannot do is to continue on the current trajectory where we are afraid to touch people. We are in our first year of administration, so this is the best time to start to look at the transformation that was come. I tell people I get up every single morning when I'm out of here and I'm undergoing my treatment, and I get up with a purpose because I continue to be in contact with my ministry. Because the people of Barbados put me here, the people of St. Michael Southeast put me here. And sick or not, I tell them I am not dead. And therefore, I will leave no stone unturned in making sure that the mandate that this administration was given is fulfilled. And I will not tolerate a situation where we are accused of doing something that we now have to correct, that we understand what we have to do. We came to office on all of those things, this transparency and the accountability in public life and the integrity. And we have a responsibility. We have the Integrity Commission meeting. We said we would do it and we did it. All of the things that we have said that we would do in the first 6 months, we have done those and surpassed them. So there are difficult decisions to be made. There are difficult times ahead. But I believe that we have to talk our people through it. We're going to have to talk to the NHC staff. We're going to have to talk to the officers. We're going to have to motivate people. Because there's a whole decade where people have not been motivated to come to work and do the people's work. So we have to engage in those conversations to make sure that housing in this country is affordable for all people. They say helping every last person, housing every last person. Went through the window. And we understand that we're not going to be able to wave a wand and build houses in this country.
Honourable Member, you have 3 more minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. But what I want that happens in the National Housing Corporation is that we do what the Honourable Minister has done here today. We look back and see where the housing stock and the lands are. Let us evaluate them. Let us look for the private developers who are ready to hit the ground running and get construction going again in this country. Let us get those projects off of the ground. Let us put the tight controls on the people that are necessary to ensure that resources are not wasted. Let us make sure that the contracts are tightened to make sure that the people who need to be held accountable in this country are held accountable. Because the last thing I want to be a party to is in the next 5 or 10 years seeing Auditor General reports which reflect negatively on the Barbados Labour Party administration. So we have the responsibility now to get it right, to stop the things that have been going on in the past and to put it right. We may not get all, but we have to start the process and we have to continue the conversation that we started with the rubbing shoulders and the people's assemblies to make sure that we do what the people have asked us to come to this parliament to be able to do. And with that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am obliged.
Thank you.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that the House be suspended until 2 p.m. this afternoon.
Question is that this House be suspended until 2 p.m. today. All members in favor say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. House is now suspended until 2 p.m. today.